Welcome to Season 3 of the Healthy Living Doesn't Have to Suck podcast. I'm Melyssa with a Y, double board certified lifestyle medicine coach, size-inclusive fitness specialist, author, and speaker dedicated to helping changemakers like you drop the struggle and create a healthy lifestyle you can love. This season, we're diving even deeper into conversations with guests from all arenas of the health and wellness industry, focused on making healthy living feel easy, enjoyable, and sustainable. Through my book, coaching community, online fitness studio, and corporate wellness packages, I'm here to provide the tools, strategies, and support you need to feel your best. Because when you show up as your healthiest self, you're unstoppable. All right, y'all, let's get to it. Here we are. It is day 7 of Lifestyle Medicine Week, y'all, and it's technically the last day that we're highlighting pillars, but spoiler alert, I have a special guest that I'm bringing on tomorrow to talk about sustainable behavior change, because through this week, we have talked so much about the what of lifestyle medicine, and we've talked about the why it's important. And along the way, we've discussed a couple strategies for the how. How do we bring this stuff into our lives? But tomorrow's conversation will wrap everything up so nicely in a beautiful bow. And in the meantime, I know you are going to enjoy this conversation that I had with Simon Matthews about all things connectedness. So without further ado, let's dive in. Welcome back, Changemakers. So excited to introduce you all to my special guest today, who is going to be talking about social connection and really highlighting that pillar for our Lifestyle Medicine Week special series. Simon, I am so excited to have you here. Thank you so much for joining us today.
My pleasure. Thank you, Melyssa. It's great to see you again. Lovely to be here.
Yeah. So for those who are listening, Simon was actually one of my mentors while I was getting my certification in health and wellness coaching. And so we've been able to stay connected through the lifestyle medicine world. And it's just really great to have this opportunity for us to reconnect. But for our listeners
Absolutely.
who might be meeting you for the very first time, do you mind sharing a little bit about your background and what brought you to lifestyle medicine?
Of course, it's a long and circuitous pathway, but I'll try and keep it brief. It wasn't always what I was going to do. Let's start there. I nearly became a career radio broadcaster shortly after leaving school. I studied French language at university, but early on I got interested in families, family therapy, systemic therapies, and so on. So that's what started leading me into this world. Then I became a psychologist, and that led me into all sorts of psychological work, unsurprising work, working with patients with depression and anxiety, PTSD, first responders, military veterans, and so on. Somewhere in there, I nearly became an airline pilot, but I didn't because of the global financial crisis. So I came back to psychology, but I had started reading about the role, for example, that nutrition plays in mood, and the role that exercise and activity play in mood. So I got really interested in those and started questioning my own practice. Why am I sitting here in an office talking to people when these things work really well also? So I went and trained as a fitness trainer, a personal trainer, and studied nutrition as well. Started blending that into my psychological consults. I even designed a protocol for what in effect is a walking in nature consultation. At the time, I was still living in Australia and living very close to national parks and forest trails and so on. And one day I woke up and became aware of this phrase, lifestyle medicine, and sort of had this sense of, oh, this is what I'm doing. So from that point, I really started getting much more interested in the world of lifestyle medicine. I'm talking about a dozen or more years ago now. And from there, once I was involved in lifestyle medicine, the kind of natural place, if you like, for a psychologist is behavioural change. So that led me to do some training in health coaching specifically. And that's how I eventually became a faculty member in a health coaching school. And these days, my work really revolves around education broadly in this area of what we might call behavioural science, behavioural change, particularly as it relates to health and well-being. It's an absolutely fascinating area. I know there's a bunch of what we call pillars or principles of lifestyle medicine: nutrition, exercise, activity, social support, so on. We'll be talking about social support.
Yeah.
But for my money, the most interesting of them all is behavioral change.
Ah,
It is fascinating, and I adore the area that I work in.
yeah. Oh my gosh. I always love these conversations because I didn't realize that was part of your story, was having these little, we'll call them side quests on your journey to finding lifestyle medicine. And
Yeah.
listeners who have heard my story, they know I have a lot of tangents too, but it was cool for me to hear some of the parallels that we actually shared, where when I was in a PhD program, I was working with first responders, combat veterans, and that kind of population, and then happened to fall into fitness during that first year in the PhD program. And life just took it from there. And it was
Yeah.
because of my internship at an integrative medicine department that I found lifestyle medicine. And I was like the perfect combination of my passion for promoting mental and physical well being, because so often they're talked about in silos. And so that's one of the
Yeah.
reasons I lifestyle medicine so
Yeah.
much, is it truly just brings it all together.
Absolutely.
So
And one of the
yeah.
fascinating things I always find in lifestyle medicine is that what we're describing, is often the experience of people who end up there.
Yeah.
There's this real sense of, oh my goodness, this is the place for me.
Aha moment. Yeah.
It is. It's an aha moment. That's exactly right. Yeah. And I don't necessarily have that sense about a lot of other disciplines or a lot of other professions. People certainly get very committed to the work that they do and they enjoy doing the work that they do. But I don't know if there's something about this field, in my experience, that often has that eye-opening kind of, oh my goodness, element to it.
Yeah, I feel the same way. And going along with the theme of social connection, the community within lifestyle medicine that I found, I will have calls with someone I've never met before, and suddenly we're chatting like we're old friends. And it's just
Yeah.
such a cool place to be part of, because everyone has very similar values. We're all part of lifestyle medicine to help with health restoration, and whichever mission we have that's aligned with that all brings us together. So yeah, I just find it absolutely amazing. And it brings me to connect with people like you, which is something I'm always grateful for. As we're thinking about the connections in our life, and I don't mind expanding on this because you mentioned nature as well. So we can look at connection even
Mm,
in a more broad sense too, because I know
absolutely. Yeah.
nature connectedness is huge for our
Yeah.
mental, physical, emotional well-being. But when we're looking at what we're wanting people to walk away from this episode, understanding about social connection and connection at large, what are some of the things that you wish people knew about the importance of connectedness?
I think so. What the first one would be exactly what you've just referred to, Melissa, which is what I might call a systemic understanding of connectedness. So when we talk about connection, we often think about about interpersonal relationships, very important, and it's not the only part of connection. So that systemic idea, which we can chat about a bit further. The second thing that I would really like people to walk away understanding is that social connection occupies, I think, a very interesting place in the set of principles of lifestyle medicine, in that it is simultaneously an input and an output.
Mm,
So if you think about diet, for example, diet is an input.
right.
Um, there's no particular output from diet other than what we do in our daily lives. Sleep is an input. Being
Yeah.
careful with toxic substances is an input. Social connection is an input and an output. We need it in order to have a rounded sense of health and well-being, and having it as an input enables us to carry it as a thread through our lives as an output as well. And so that kind of, I don't know, maybe continuity is the word there, or that biphasic or double-sidedness to social connection, I think is a really important point for us to hover on.
I love that perspective too, because I certainly haven't ever thought about it that way. And as you were explaining it, I was like, oh, that's true. So it does take energy for us to be able to output and reach out and build up other people. But it's just as important to have that reciprocated. And I also try to I always try to share with people, like, it's not just about the quantity of people that you're connected to. It's really
Yeah.
the quality of those connections and interactions and what kind of energy they bring to you. Because if you're just being around people to be around people, it's not as fulfilling or energizing as if you're finding yourself around family that might be draining or coworkers that are negative. So I always try to make that distinction for people too, because it truly is what is the input that is coming in from these types of social connections.
Yeah. Yeah. And you've raised a really interesting perspective there, Melissa, that a lot of our social connections, we don't, depending on the nature of it, we don't necessarily have immediate control over. So, for example, your family is your family, for better or worse.
We love them. We do.
Yes.
Sometimes we might not like
Your
them,
family
but we
members.
love them.
You get what you get in your family. Less so with your friends, of course.
Yeah,
We select friends. Work environments are interesting because in work environments, we will often naturally gravitate towards and form stronger relationships with people with whom we feel an affinity. And those people, of course, can become very important in our social networks. And at the same time, in workplaces, you also get what you get. And sometimes that means that you're working with someone with whom you don't feel a particular affinity, or someone who you feel rubbed up the wrong way when you're in their presence for whatever reason. I'm not suggesting that they're doing that, but for experience, to be conscious and thoughtful about deliberately creating and cultivating connections which we know are going to be useful for us, in order that, and this is the reciprocal part of it, in order that we can do the same. And for me, that part's really important. Social connection, as a principle of lifestyle medicine, is not just for me. It's generative, that I can then do something really useful with that as well.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. This is already such a great conversation. And I did want to take some time for us to come back to that idea of the systemic connection, because as you shared, we're really talking about what's most commonly thought about with social connection is the interpersonal. But for me, having come from an animal training background and being really passionate about
Yeah.
the human animal bond, I have my cat sleeping in his little hut back here, and connectedness with animals is something that I've always found just totally enhanced my well-being. It brought joy to my life. And so when we're looking at not just connectedness to other creatures, but connectedness to nature, to a sense of purpose, to a higher power, like all of those different facets of connectedness. Do you mind expanding on that a little bit more and sharing your perspective with that?
Yeah, and look, I think you've done a lovely job of laying the foundation there, Melissa. Certainly, people are an important part of that, and I'll share another perspective about that in a moment. The people part of it, but people are part of it. Certainly, animals are part of it, and of course, you can divide the world into two types of people: dog people and cat people. You're a cat person. I'm a dog. I'm a dog person. So.
Listen, I'm both. I grew up with dogs. We're gonna eventually have another dog in our life, but right now I am the cat mom that I
You're
never
a cat,
thought
but
I would
okay.
be. Yes.
So animals certainly play a really significant role, and there's plenty of research about the well-being impacts and effects of being surrounded by pets and having companion animals in our lives. We can talk about connectedness just to the idea of community or a culture in which we live, and some values that we might adhere to in that culture. And by culture, of course, we can be talking about any number of things. We can be talking about national culture,
Right.
or we can be talking about urban culture or rural culture. We can be talking about religious culture or spiritual culture, and so on. So we can think of, and I would encourage listeners to think of that idea, culture, very broadly. We often, I think, conflate culture and ethnicity, and that provides us, I think, with a very limited understanding of the influence of culture in our lives.
Sure.
But whether you practice a particular religion or not, being connected to something beyond you, something bigger than you, something broader than you, perhaps even something intangible, something awe-inspiring
Mm.
is an important part of that sense of connectedness for all of us. So we can think about this in different ways. We can think about it, if you like, in a stratified kind of way. One of the things I don't like about a stratified understanding is that it immediately prompts us to think hierarchically. So we
Yeah.
think, this stratum is more important than that one, and so on. We can think a bit like layers of an onion.
Sure.
You peel off one layer and there's another one underneath. You peel off that one and there's another one again.
Yeah.
And each of those layers of an onion, while broadly representing that idea of connectedness, does something a little bit different for us. We can think about it perhaps like gear wheels, a series of complex gear wheels of different sizes that all move with each other, but at different speeds and exerting some different amounts of force and influence
Sure.
and so on. I kind of like that idea because it reminds me that whichever gear wheel I identify as, I'm part of something much bigger and much more complex that itself fits into an even bigger structure, and so on and so on.
Right.
And that's one of the mental tricks I use to induce a sense of awe for myself, to something mind-bogglingly enormous.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. That's such a cool one. And yeah, again, I've never thought about it that way, but it really highlights the multifaceted nature of our lives and within connectedness and within the aspects of connectedness within those levels of connectedness. So I really appreciate you sharing that with us. There was something you wanted to come back to regarding the people.
Oh, yeah, exactly right. Yeah. So this is an area of social connection, which I think sometimes gets overlooked, but I think is actually very significant as just part of the background of our lives. And there's a little bit written about it, and you may see it referred to as social snacking.
Huh.
And the idea of social snacking, of course, if we let's continue the food analogy. If we think about dining, then we think about it being nutritionally balanced, having everything that we need. And so if we take that metaphor across into social connection, then we're talking about those deep, significant, meaningful connections that are often many years old, that have endured with us through lots of changes. And they provide us a lot of what we need in terms of social connectedness. In the same way as day to day, we might pick up a handful of nuts or a piece of fruit or something like that. We can snack socially as well. And I think social snacking is one of the most delightful forms of social interaction there is. I make a practice of doing it several times a day. And social snacking is really investing just a little more than you usually might in
Yeah.
those everyday interactions. So when I go to my favorite bar to have coffee in the morning here in Madrid, I don't just order my coffee. I talk to Miguel as well. When I go to the empanadilla store just around the corner to buy empanadillas for lunch, I chat to Flor, about how her day's going.
Right.
I chat to Raul and Manuel at the fruit store. Sometimes I might hold the door open for someone behind me and say, "Good morning. I hope you have a great day," and so on.
Yeah.
We all have many opportunities through the day to have these little micro interactions or micro moments,
Yeah.
snacking moments of connectedness, which in and of themselves don't contribute anything of great significance, but they do give us that feeling of being anchored to and connected to a community or a group of people. They give us a feeling of belonging. And often, of course, those moments are reciprocated as well for
Right.
us. So someone will share good wishes with us or wish us a good day or ask us about something going on in our lives and so on.
I've always referred to activity snacks, like those little mini moments of movement that you can get throughout the day. And I love the idea of social snacking. Like, that's such a great term. Oh my gosh.
Yeah,
See, I'm learning so much from
yeah.
this episode too. This is why I love these kinds of conversations. And that I think actually that's a great segue into normally what we call our empower section. So, as we're trying to think about maybe some of the things we would like to start making changes with, or how can we start improving our connectedness in whichever area that people choose to. What are some of the things that you find helpful, either for yourself or for your clients, to reflect on or ask yourself when you're looking at what you would like to start making changes with and how to start making those changes?
Yeah, great question. Great question. So let me start by saying that there's a very significant body of positive psychology research that examines a number of what are called PPIs, positive psychology interventions, many of which revolve around social connectedness in one way or another. For example, one of the famous, or perhaps not famous, perhaps very well known gratitude interventions, the idea of writing a gratitude letter,
Yeah.
has at it's considered a positive psychology intervention related to gratitude, and it has at its core social connection because
Mm.
you're expressing gratitude to someone. For those people who are interested in exploring some of the research, then I would certainly suggest starting with the positive psychology intervention research as a means of connecting with some of these really significant things that we can do. Beyond that, the principles I think that can sit behind supporting someone to do this are the same principles that we would use in coaching broadly in relation to any area of health behavior change, or indeed any area of change. Step number one, compassionately start where you are. You and I have in our conversation mapped out a network or a world of different types of social connection. And it's important at the same time that people who aren't currently doing that don't feel like, that's all just too hard for me.
Right.
Start where you are. And if where you are is having very little social interaction or feeling like your network of friends is small, start with what's there. And I would say, too, for people who are feeling particularly perhaps low in confidence or concerned about trying to build out some meaningful social networks, start with those small things. Start with the smacking. And again, we can probably analogize this to health more broadly. If you have been physically unwell, then you don't first sit down to a 7-course degustation meal as your very first reconnection with food.
Yeah.
You sip some water. You maybe have a quarter or a third of a banana. Maybe you have a couple of slices of
Some
apple,
soup. Yeah.
some soup. Yeah, exactly
Yeah.
right. You start with those little things and just gradually work back to that. In the same way, if you're feeling like you've been socially disconnected, socially isolated, then there's always that temptation to feel like you need to do something big and you need to do it now. And sometimes, paradoxically, that leads to an experience of perceived failure. We set about trying to do something major. It doesn't feel like it's worked the way that we wanted. What does that do? Well, it further wounds our confidence. So instead, start small. I don't know. We say hello to the barista who's making you coffee. Ask them how their day's going.
Right.
Say hello to the cashier in the grocery store. Walk into a fruit and vegetable store and ask someone how much are the pineapples or how much are the bananas. Just engage in small amounts of conversation. Gradually rebuild your own confidence in knowing that you're capable of doing this. You're capable of establishing and developing social connections. Pick someone, if you feel like your social network is small, pick one person and reach out to that person, disconnected or overwhelmed about how to get started. If you feel like you already have an established base of social connection and you want to develop that further, then I would encourage the general principle of taking it to the next level, whatever that next level might look like for you.
Right.
So we talked about that systemic network of connections. Maybe you have a good network of friends with whom you're well connected, but you don't yet have that strong sense of connection to meaning, purpose, or spirituality. If so, start thinking about what that might look like for you. Or maybe there's a particular friends with whom you could have different experiences in order to deepen that connection.
Yeah.
So some of this inevitably involves taking a risk, because as soon as we're talking about interacting with someone else, we're also talking about part of this not being within our control. We can't control how the other person responds. So an important part of social connection is to recognize that it's valuable to make the efforts and to allow grace for the response, not necessarily to get overly invested in what the response might mean,
Right.
and certainly not to give up trying just
Yeah.
because you get that initial response. For whatever reason, the group of friends that you're with may find that they're not ready to deepen that relationship in the way that you
Right.
wanted. That's okay.
Yeah.
You've done the work, you've thought it out, you've done something that matters to you, and that's really what counts here. And if you remain mindful about endeavouring to do that, then other opportunities to do that will present themselves over time. So the short answer to all this, Melyssa, is that there is no short answer. It's a long and complex answer that involves lots of moving parts. It involves a recognition that connectedness requires a response from the other person, and that some of our efforts to do that might go unrequited. And it's important for us to develop a sense of robustness or resilience around that, and be prepared to recognizing that there is fundamental value in doing that, and to continue seeking opportunities to do that, even though our first efforts might not take us to where we want.
Yeah, there's something magical that has just happened from like this series of guest interviews that I really hope people listening will recognize a pattern. And that is coming from experts in this industry is start small. Starting small is what's going to help
Yeah.
you get set up for success in the long run. So I really appreciated you sharing that too. Like just start with the snacking. And for someone like me, I am actually an ambivert. So I have extroverted tendencies, but I recharge my batteries while I'm alone. And COVID really threw a wrench in that because I feel like the whole phrase, if you don't use it, you lose it. I feel like my social battery just got totally shot during lockdown. So I had to be really intentional about building up what I now refer to as my social endurance to really make sure that I have the energy to give my best self in those instances, and to also seek out those connections that energize me instead of just finding myself out being around people just for the sake of being around people.
Yeah.
So yeah, I
If it-
appreciated that touch on confidence too, like rebuilding your confidence in those interactions.
Yeah. Melissa, you've touched on something very important there that I think is worth bringing out too, and it's a confusion that often emerges in this area, and that is the idea that people who go and make social connections are the extroverts, and it's harder for introverts to do that, and so on. So there's a number of things go on there. One is that we often conflate shyness with introversion, and they're two different things, of course. It's important for all of us to recognize that, and the everyday phrase I think is really valuable here. How do you recharge your batteries?
Yes.
And for me, I'm an introvert. In fact, I'm actually an off the scale introvert. I am so far down the introverted end that you wouldn't believe it. So for me, the only way that I can recharge my batteries is if I just crawl away from light noise, sound, people, voices, interactions, and sit by myself. I'm also very happy working alone
Yeah.
for hours or days. I feel a strong urge to have to connect. And at the same time, I recognize the danger in that. And now that I know myself better than I did when I was 20 years old, say, I take that time to recharge. I
Yes.
make sure that I take time to just be by myself and
Mm-hmm.
enjoy doing the things that I enjoy doing by myself.
Mm-hmm.
And I put myself out in the world to experience the joy of connection with others
Yeah.
and to make efforts to build those connections because I recognize the longer term value to my own health and well-being of doing that. And I also recognize the way in which I can do something useful for the community in which I live, seeking to build those connections as well. So a big part of this is for all of us to learn who we are and to learn
Yes.
what the balance looks like for each of us. Learn what we need to do to recharge, to be ready to go back out into the world again. Yeah.
You and I are kindred spirits in that way. I need to have my headphones on, listening to music, and just like maybe hugging the cat if he lets me.
Yeah.
It's one of those things where it is important to get to know yourself better in those instances, because that's going to help you figure out your needs in those moments to help you achieve that healthier, happier you. Because if you're just
Yeah.
doing things because you think you quote unquote should do them, is that really helping you live the kind of life that you want to? And typically the answer is no. So really
Yeah.
figuring that out and getting clear for yourself, and like you said, being intentional about putting yourself in those situations that are going to contribute to your well-being.
Yeah.
And I think we did a nice job discussing some of the ways that our listeners can start engaging in making these changes. I know you shared some of the information about the positive psychology interventions, things like the gratitude letter, and looking into that research, just taking those social snacks. But is there anything else that you'd like to leave the audience with when it comes to how they can take this information that we've shared and start bringing it into their own lives?
I think just a moment ago, Melissa, you mentioned the word intentionality, and I think that's a key word here for all of us to recognize that that change can happen accidentally. Change can happen without necessarily having
Sure.
any intention to it. That's not necessarily the sort of change that might endure, and it's not necessarily the sort of change that we might enjoy either. So, having an intentionality about this, I think, really sits at the heart of it. Recognizing that connectedness in all the forms that we spoke about is a key part of health and well-being. Recognize that there's an opportunity here not just to develop your own health and well-being and strengthen and bolster your own health and well-being input side of it, but also recognize that there's an output side of it as well. As a result of doing that, we can take those exact same strengths, capacities, resources, interactional styles, and turn those into something that benefits others. We know from some recent research, some of it done during the pandemic, which was a very large scale natural experiment on the effects of social isolation in many ways. We know that social isolation is harmful. Piece of research, or well-known piece of research, the authors concluded that the impact on morbidity and mortality of loneliness is equivalent to consistently smoking about 15 cigarettes a day. So if you look at the way your health and longevity is impacted by smoking at that rate, being socially isolated has roughly the same impact on longevity and well-being over time. So loneliness is deadly. We know that. Loneliness is not good for us. It's not what we were designed for.
Right.
We all have different needs for levels of connectedness. That's okay. That just represents the delightful variation of humanity
Right.
and species as well. And we all, some of us have sit
Do
by
their own
themselves all
thing.
the time, and that's okay too. So the variation is there. The recognition of the central role that this plays in health and wellbeing is important. The intentionality around constructing the connectedness that you want in your life, that brings you to life and allows you to enliven others, I think is the other key part of this. And always remembering that there's both the opportunity to internally strengthen and simultaneously give back. For me, that's a real key part of this.
That is an amazing way to start bringing this conversation to a close. And I think I would be remiss if I didn't bring up, since we're talking about the benefits of staying connected, is that from a behavior change perspective, there's so much research that shows when you have the proper social support for your health behavior, it
Yeah.
leads to that sustainable change. And so I think
Yeah.
that just brings everything together. And we really appreciate you sharing your time and your energy and knowledge with us, Simon. I've been ending all of the guest episodes by asking, when you think about the phrase healthy living doesn't have to suck, how do you bring that into your own life or your work?
I think what we've been talking about is a good example of that. And for me, social snacking is one of the great joys of my daily life. So that certainly doesn't have to suck. But for me, the other way that's really important is to remember that all the principles of healthy living that we talk about, essentially the principles of lifestyle medicine, diet, sleep, activity and exercise, connectedness, avoiding toxic substances, managing stress and so on, they don't happen in isolation from each other. And we can supercharge the effects of these by doing really simple things. Go to the park with some friends to have lunch.
Yeah.
There's kind of, four pillars right there. Social connectedness to nature, good food, actually probably five, a bit of
Stress is in there again.
stress relief
Yeah.
and a bit of movement too. Because what do we do when we go to the park? You often bring a ball or a tennis racket and a ball or something like that. You move around a bit. So really simple things like that help us to combine multiple principles of lifestyle health all in one go and have a great time doing.
Yes. Oh my gosh. I love that answer so much. And I love this whole conversation that we've had today. And I'm sure our listeners have too. So if they would like to follow you or connect with you, where are some of the best places for them to do that?
Very easy. So LinkedIn is a very easy place for people who happen to be on LinkedIn. I've got a website as well, which I'm happy to share with you, and maybe that can go in the show notes or something like that.
Absolutely.
But LinkedIn, I would say, that's the social media platform that I most inhabit. If you happen to jump on LinkedIn, you'll probably bump into me there.
And you share some great content too, so they'll definitely find value if they choose to follow you. Simon, thank you again for being here with us. We really appreciate it.
My pleasure. Thanks, Melyssa.
All right, listeners, until next time, keep it real, stay positive, and go get connected. As a quick, friendly reminder, the information in these podcasts are always strictly for educational purposes only. Thanks so much for listening, Changemakers. And if you can please remember to head to your favorite podcast platform and subscribe, rate, and review. It will help this podcast reach other changemakers so they can start listening and tuning in each week. As a bonus, if you've been wanting to make healthier choices but don't feel like you have the time or even know where to start, make sure you check out my Lifestyle Medicine Mini Makeover. It's a free 7-day email series designed to help you take small, powerful steps toward better health that can fit into your busy lifestyle. Each day, you'll get an email that educates you on one of the lifestyle medicine pillars, along with a simple mini challenge to put what you learned into action. If you're ready to level up your health with lifestyle medicine, Then sign up now at healthylivingdoesn'thavetosuck.com/makeover and let's do this together. By the end of this week-long challenge, you will have success in showing yourself that healthy living doesn't have to suck.